So the only reason you're even considering doing this thing that's like not right for you is because somebody else thinks you should, or like that's just what everybody does or something. But you'll find like no part of you is actually gunning for it. So if that's the case, then just don't do it, right? But usually when people come to me, it's because they do have an inner conflict. And so one part of them is like, I really want to do this. And another part is like, I really don't want to do this. And so what your question boils down to is like, which one of those parts is right? Which one of those parts has a motivation that's actually like healthy and in line with like living my best life?
Hello. So, in my journey, as I am learning how to be a better partner to myself, I have been really interested in this topic of procrastination, perfectionism, because I feel like those two things really have been showing themselves in my own life. And I feel like for many other people too, especially in these kind of solopreneurship journeys, we have to really reevaluate and find different narratives to help us understand our authentic creative process and how we can continue growing into the role of a business operator and what that means in our lives. So, I've been really wanting to get more perspectives on perfectionism and how that narrative can be used as a tool to help motivate, help it feel safe and comfortable for us to continue towards our goals, just with a little bit of a different narrative around it. So I was really, really excited that I got to talk with Presley Pizzo. She is a productivity coach and she is extremely insightful on these topics of procrastination, perfectionism. She also has a blog. She writes about internal family systems and productivity, coaching, and other really cool topics along those lines. So she also offers group and individual coaching, productivity coaching, and group coaching in the workplace. I thought that was really cool. So she offers a lot of services to help people in her role as a coach. So I was super excited that I got to talk with her and pick her brain a little bit on this topic of productivity and perfectionism. So I hope you enjoy listening to the following and learning from what Presley has to share. And I hope that you'll also be able to stick around till the end and you'll see some links to her website. And I'll also have those in the description box. But yeah, those links, you can take a test on her website to figure out what your procrastination style is. And yeah, enjoy.
Okay, so I guess why I'm really excited to speak with you is because I'm on this journey of my own where I am learning how to partner with myself more. And how, in those moments that things, just all those thoughts come up, how to keep on going so that it opens the door for good things to happen more, And I really love that your perspective is about procrastination and perfectionism. And so I just wanted to learn more from you. Like first of all, like, can you kind of describe what your like how you like to approach this subject with people and just kind of what you do?
Yeah. So I call myself a productivity coach and I work with people one-on-one. I have a package called Painless Productivity. And over a series of sessions, we really get to the root of why they are procrastinating. And, that comes down to some sort of fear. There's some reason why you're avoiding the thing. So that means there's something you're afraid you're going to feel if you're doing it, right? And so we get into like, what are those fears? And then underneath the fears, there's going to be some sort of belief. So like, imagine you wanted to write a novel, but you're afraid of of, writing a bad novel. And so you're procrastinating on writing. Well, why is that scary? So like, it turns out that's not a given, that writing a bad novel is going to be like a terrifying thing. And so underneath the fear, you'll find a belief. And the belief might be a perfectionistic belief. Like, if I don't do a perfect job the first time, then that means I'm stupid or something like that. And so eventually, we dig and we dig, we find the fear and then we find the belief, and then we're able to kind of expose the belief to daylight, and it tends to just kind of transform itself. You tend to just, once you like bring that to the surface and fully experience it, you go like, oh, that's not really true. I'm not stupid if I don't write the great American novel on my first try. And that's
Right.
one thing that, like, you could just tell yourself, you could skip this whole process and just tell yourself, I'm not stupid if I don't write the great American novel on the first try, but it won't really sink in for most people most of the time, like give it a try. Like if that's enough, fantastic. But
Mhm.
most of the time, that doesn't really make you feel differently. Like you're thinking it, but you're not feeling it.
Mhm.
And so I take people through a process of getting to where they can feel the truth of that. And then they don't need to generate this fear, and then they don't need to avoid the task. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that is really beautiful to me, that you have to be able to feel, like you're saying, like you have to be able to feel into it. Like I notice for myself that I tend to try to, like you were describing, think my way through
Yes.
things, but then that feeling isn't transferring. And yeah, I think that that's something after a lot of life changes or a lot of stress, it can be hard to remember how to feel and remember these ways of interacting with ourself, how to be like, okay, we gotta feel through the emotion to realize, like, let our body realize, oh, it's not this scary thing actually. um yeah, that freeing kind of feeling, a feeling like we can look at everything and there's nothing that I have to be like hiding from, kind of. That's really important to me.
That's so key. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for describing that. I wanted to ask you specifically, um, like, what is it about the topic of perfectionism and procrastination that makes you so passionate about it, and that you feel like why it is so relevant to people and necessary for people to learn how to manage these things in their lives?
Yeah. So I really went through it myself. Like I remember being in like second grade or something, and my parents actually pulling me aside and being like, listen, it's okay if you get B's sometimes. And I was like, maybe it's okay with you, you know? So like I just always had this perfectionist streak. And when I was growing up in school, it actually wasn't that much of a problem, because school, like I knew my definition of perfection was straight A's, and I knew how to do that. And I was good. I know I was one of those students who just was able to get straight A's. So fine. But then you get into like the real world. My introduction to the real world is actually something people don't consider super real, which is getting a PhD. But it was still, similar to going out and getting a job, in that it's a lot more unpredictable. It's not just like do this and you get an A. Um, and so things started to get really scary. And I had a lot of imposter syndrome, in grad school, and then later when I went into tech. Both places where it's kind of intimidating to be a woman and all of that. But my perfectionist streak definitely played into it a lot. And I see this in other people too. There's this phenomenon of being like a former gifted kid, where you're like, everybody told me I was really smart and I was good at school, but now I'm in the real world and I'm like procrastinating. Like I thought I was smart and a hard worker, but I'm terrified all the time and I'm putting all my work off. Like what's going on? So I'm really passionate about helping people who are in that situation, like get their confidence back, get their ability to get things done back, and just stop feeling, like they're kind of hiding and just like worrying about what's going to happen when somebody finally notices.
Right. Yeah, that makes so much sense. Like you said, like when we get into like real world circumstances or different circumstances in which different parts of ourselves, we I've noticed for myself, it's maybe sometimes I have to learn how to support myself differently in unfamiliar situations. It's just like learning how to help myself adapt to that. And that learning process, it, like, for me, I guess I'm feeling like for myself, when I notice procrastination and perfectionism in me, that it means it's a good thing, because I'm learning to adapt to a new process, a new way of life, with a new era of my life, with different opportunities and good things to explore. So it's overall a happy thing. Like, you were going into your career, it was good changes, but that doesn't mean the good changes didn't have extra stress to learn how to deal with. Like,
Yeah, I love that positive twist you put on it, of like just normalizing that when things change in your life, there's going to be growing pains. And that's normal. It's not a failure. It doesn't mean you didn't belong here and you shouldn't have done this. But it is something you have to work through.
absolutely. Yeah. We got to take accountability so we can get to our happiness and our goals, and keep things stable for ourselves and our loved ones. And I think it's so cool that yourself and other people are examples of helping people be like, it's okay, we got this. And like, therapists aren't accessible for so many people, I'm not talking about just for money reasons, but for the relational dynamic kind of
Mm,
reasons, So I think
yeah.
it's, I think it's really beautiful that that in your coaching role, that you're able to help this necessary information, this necessary kind of learning curve, be accessible to more people.
Yeah. I think there are wonderful therapists out there. And at the same time, to your point, I have come across people who are like, I don't want to see a therapist. Like, I've had bad experiences with them and I want to try something different. I think it's great for them to have access to like just other choices. And I've also seen people saying like that they're dealing with this procrastination and perfectionism issue. Um, and they're in therapy and their therapist isn't really able to help them with it. Or, maybe they're just using their therapy time to focus on other things. And so I really love that I get to specialize in this. And, like you're saying, just give people the opportunity to work through this issue that they might think, like I did when I was going through it. I didn't think there was anything for this. Like, I had never heard of anything besides, like, get a new productivity app, like start bullet journaling. Like, I didn't know that a therapist could help me with it. I didn't know that a coach could help me with it. Like, I had no sense of what I could do about it or that it was fixable.
Right. Yeah. These little tools you're talking about, these things that we see in pop culture, or those, therapists, or things that are just more easy to kind of come across as advice, like the bullet journals and the apps you mentioned. I read on your website, in one of your blog posts, that these are kind of more like the stopgap things that we try to use temporarily. But yeah, I think it's really beautiful. You help people get to the root of things. I I was wondering, like, as people are trying to get to the root of things, what are some examples that you advise people to look for to kind of tell if perfectionism might be at play?
Yeah, that's a really important question because a lot of perfectionists, even some of my clients, don't realize that they're perfectionists because they think, okay, perfectionist, well, has perfection in the word. It means doing things perfectly. And, the problem is just that you always insist on that and it's kind of too much. But they are hyper aware that they don't do things perfectly. Now, in reality, no one does things perfectly because that's not a real thing, right? And so I define being a perfectionist as holding yourself to impossible standards and using all or nothing thinking. So, for instance, like when I was growing up, I decided that a B was a bad grade. Now, a B is not a bad grade. It's like literally defined as like good, right? um, but in my mind, it was like A's are good and everything else is bad. There's no in between, there's no gray. And so that's a great example of setting yourself up for perfectionism, like playing out in your life, is having that all or nothing. So the symptoms that you get are like if you take up a new hobby and you realize you're not immediately good at it, and then you don't want to practice because you can't tolerate being bad at something, even if it's reasonable and it's because you're new and you have to practice in order to get better. It's like going through that phase of not being good at it feels really bad. Another one would be if you can't tolerate like writing a messy first draft in order to then iterate on it and make it better and better. So again, you can't tolerate like not being good at it right now, or you can't tolerate putting something on the page that you know isn't good. Perfectionists will tend to criticize themselves a lot, even just in their heads, like strong inner critic. And you might also hold yourself to a higher standard than you hold other people to.
Okay, yeah. I definitely resonate with that subject of, kind of being judgmental towards myself when trying to learn something new.
Yeah.
It's like, wanting, I guess that's the way that I most relate to these different signs that you described. I know I like gotten a harmonica in the past, and I learned like one little tune, and then I was like, oh, it's going to be too difficult to learn anything else, or I think it's so what do you think is the role, like, to combat that sense of judgment? Like, what would you say is like one of the most important things to help combat that inner mental posture of judging yourself and looking for a specific outcome in order to feel like it was worth doing,
Yeah. Well, the end result that makes a difference is getting a more like nuanced view of things. So instead of this all or nothing thinking, you get like, hey, there's such a thing as good enough. But like we were talking about before, with the difference between thinking something and feeling it, it doesn't always work to just tell yourself like, hey, just do good enough. And so the process that I lead people through would be more like talking to your inner critic, really getting to know it in an open-minded way. So people will come in and basically be critical of their inner critic, right? Like this voice in my head that tells me I'm bad at everything and that's terrible is obviously unhealthy. I need to get rid of it. How do I get rid of it? But we can't really get rid of parts of ourselves, So it's actually the healthy thing to do is to fix your relationship with it. It's basically like you're in a dysfunctional relationship with this part of yourself, And so you can be like, hey, it seems to be really important to you to like beat up on me if I'm not doing things perfectly. How come? And if you get really genuinely curious about that, you end up finding this like much softer side of your inner critic that's like, I'm really worried about you. Like, remember that time that you made this kind of mistake and then you had this terrible consequence? I don't want that to happen again. So unfortunately, I don't have like a great way to, make you good at things. But what I can do, it's like if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. All I have is this hammer of criticizing you. And then you're like, oh, okay, what if we could find some other tools to help me avoid like catastrophic failure, And then you find those other tools, and that combined with this process, like getting to know and kind of befriend your inner critic, allows it to stop, beating up on you.
Okay, that's a really a beautiful dynamic I hear you describing, that there's that side of you that underlying it wants to help you, it cares, it's afraid, it doesn't want to suffer also, like it's going to suffer also if this other part suffers. So it's like, I'm just trying to help you. I only know how to use like shame maybe or fear to motivate you. And it's like, I'm trying to help you. And then this other part is like, okay, I understand that you're trying to help me, but I need help in order to help you. Like, I'm not going to be able to help you if I'm so afraid. And just like, like I know for me, I come from a recovery background. So I feel like for me, that is really where a lot of my ineffective kind of coping skills where they would come in more when I was looking for that big distraction from those fearful thoughts. But yeah, I really love that you are saying that, we can come back to that place of knowing that inner critic is ultimately coming from a gentle, loving place.
Mhm.
Like a powerful mental switch to make, I think, in order, or instead of like just like fighting fire with fire, back to that voice.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a question I wanted to ask you that I think is a little bit, I don't know, what you'll think of it, but for me, I think it's really confusing.
Mm.
And so this question is, how can I, or other people, just how can we sort out whether it's a matter of procrastination and perfectionism, or if it's simply an incompatible thing we're trying to do?
Yeah.
Just what are your thoughts on that
Well,
subject?
it's funny you ask because I actually used to sell a session called a discernment session to help people figure this out.
Yeah.
Um, so sometimes the answer is easy, and that's when you don't feel any inner conflict. So the only reason you're even considering doing this thing that's like not right for you is because somebody else thinks you should, or like that's just what everybody does or something. But you'll find like no part of you is actually gunning for it. So if that's the case, then just don't do it. Right. But usually when people come to me, it's because they do have an inner conflict. And so one part of them is like, I really want to do this. And another part is like, I really don't want to do this.
Mhm.
And so what your question boils down to is like, which one of those parts is right? Which one of those parts has a motivation that's actually like healthy and in line with like living my best life? Right.
Mhm.
And so the place to start is getting really curious about what those parts' motivations are. So, like, again, with my example of a novel, you might be like, okay, so part of me really wants to write a novel. How come? And you don't just like take it for granted and, stop at like whatever the first thing comes to mind. You really get curious and you might find like many motivations. And then you can do the same thing with the part that doesn't want to write the novel. And so you might find some that are kind of like obviously not the best motivations, like not the healthiest. You might be like, ooh, if I wrote a novel, it would really show my sixth grade English teacher who gave me a bad grade. Like it would really show her. And then you can be like, all right, that's not a reason why I should spend like a year of my life writing a book. Um, but ultimately, I actually think the best thing to do is instead of trying to like judge these reasons and decide like which part is right, it's to do this kind of process that I take people through, where you really meet each part, you befriend it, you hold space for all of its fears. You find any of those like beliefs deep down that we talked about, that might be like kind of generating fears that aren't actually necessary. And then the parts kind of relax into their healthiest motivations. And so you might find that they relax all of their motivations away and they're like, actually, you don't need to write a book. You have nothing to prove. Or you might find that they're like, okay, showing up my English teacher, that was a little silly, but I do genuinely want to write a book. And then, if you do the same process with the part that doesn't want to write a book, it might be like, okay, I used to be really scared that writing a book would like, be too vulnerable and then people would judge me. But now I realize that like I love myself no matter what. And I really do have something worthwhile to say. And so, you know what? It's okay if not everybody likes my book. And now you have not only gotten the answer to your question, like, yes, writing the book is a good idea, but also you've worked through the blocks that were going to keep you from doing it, that were going to make you procrastinate. So, when the opportunity is available to really go deep with that, that's my preference over just trying to like guess what the right answer is by kind of judging the health of your different motivations.
Okay, that's genius to me, because what I have been doing for myself is just trying to blindly experiment,
Hmm.
just blindly experimenting, and being like, well, is this compatible for me? How do I even tell? And I keep on being like, I'm having good and bad feelings, so how can I listen to that feeling and understand it? So that makes a lot of sense that you're saying that we can look at the motivations, like, so if each part of us represents a different feeling or thought we have around this thing we might want to do, then to really break down the motivations that led us, that are maybe they're undefined, they're unidentified. And I have not done that, and I will be doing that now.
Awesome. Yeah.
But
It's
I'll
just like you said about like, looking in every corner, not like hiding anything from yourself. You can do that with these motivations because there might be some things that you wouldn't want to admit to everybody that like this is one of your reasons for wanting to do something, but admitting it to yourself can be really helpful.
Okay, right. Yeah, that authenticity with our own selves is so important. And I noticed for myself too that I can or in the past, not so much lately, I don't think, but in the past I've definitely noticed that I have this narrative that I tell myself that is for the purpose of surviving with other people.
Mm.
um, and I kind of lost track, I think, of my own sense of that relationship to myself, of knowing how do I speak to myself authentically? Like, how do I even admit to myself what my true feelings and thoughts are?
Yeah. Yeah. So important because I get it. Like sometimes for survival, we can't show people everything about ourselves, and that's fine. But when you let that become like a mask you even wear to yourself, it really cuts you off from yourself. And then all kinds of, things get harder.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for describing that. That's extremely beautiful for me to realize that, yeah, this is a normal part of the process. I'm still on a good track, and I'm going to lay out my motivations and yeah, look at what my motivations are with those different parts of me. So thank you.
Absolutely.
So yeah, something that you've touched on this topic before, but I was curious to hear, uh, just hear you lay it out again, is this topic of what is the difference between imposter syndrome compared to just being new at something?
Yeah. Yeah. So when you're like new or inexperienced or just learning a skill, um, often you're not good at it yet. You're not supposed to be good at it yet. Or even if you happen to already be good at it, you might not have the evidence to really know that and really be confident in it. And that's just normal. That's just part of life. And then imposter syndrome is when you do have the evidence that you are good at something and other people are telling you that you're winning awards, you're getting promoted, whatever. And instead of all of that positive feedback making you feel more and more confident, it's making you feel worse because you are holding yourself to an impossible standard. So the perfectionism ties in here, and you're not meeting that impossible standard. And so you think that all these people who think you're good at something are actually wrong. So now you think, oh my God, I'm like fooling them. And that means they could find out. So this is really terrifying. And so people will kind of live in fear and not want to be too exposed. Compliments will make them feel worse instead of better. And it's not based in evidence. It's like counter to the evidence, which is why people make such a big deal out of it, give it a name and everything. Is it's so fascinating to us that people can be like, I think I heard that Maya Angelou had imposter syndrome, and we're like, but she was amazing. And it's like, yeah, being amazing doesn't make you not have this. In fact, it's part of the perfect storm that creates it. And one thing that I think is really interesting about this and what makes it hard for people to separate between like, hey, you're just not good at this yet, but that's okay, and you have imposter syndrome, is that I think our culture is kind of obsessed with confidence. So people will think that like it's always healthy to feel confident and to believe in yourself. And I think the issue is that we need to distinguish between being confident in your skills and being confident in yourself, right? So there's like, I am good at roller skating or whatever. And then there's, I am a good person. I am worthwhile. Like I have self-worth. And because our culture doesn't always like differentiate between these things, it becomes like this huge insult if you ever want to admit to yourself or tell someone else that like their skills just aren't there yet. Because that feels like it's undermining their self-worth. And so that just makes it harder to like notice imposter syndrome and to actually treat it. Because again, with imposter syndrome, it's like the evidence that your skills are good is already there. And so getting better at your skills or getting more evidence that you have good skills isn't going to fix the imposter syndrome. What's going to fix the imposter syndrome is working on your self-worth. You know, and once you have that self-worth, you believe that you're unconditionally a good person, then you don't have to set up this weird trap where like you have to be perfect or else you're terrible. And then if you don't have to be perfect in order to avoid being terrible, then you can finally realize like, oh yeah, I'm not a perfect, I don't know why I chose roller skating, but sure, I'm not a perfect roller skater, but I'm a good enough roller skater to have won this trophy. So yes, I do deserve this trophy. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It's the difference between self-worth and ourself as a person, and then our self-worth in our skills. Yeah. That becomes confusing to me also because just based on the different situations I've been in my life, sometimes I'll be like, what is considered a skill in one environment is considered a limitation in another. And then I guess it depends more on what I'm committing to. I guess like if I'm committing to a certain environment, then my conclusion would be that in order to have confidence, I need to validate myself as a human instead of myself in this exact skill. Yeah, that gets kind of muddy in there for me, but I do appreciate your clarification that it's you know, with imposter syndrome, it's more about the way that we can react to the accolades and the recognition. And yeah, I think, you know, these kind of narratives in pop culture and that we learn through storytelling and religion, it has to do with kind of competition environments, and that, you know, that scarcity mindset like that. You know, it's kind of the ways that we talk to ourselves can sometimes be a relic of that also. Yeah. For myself, I don't really have those external awards or recognitions. It very much is a process, I guess, more so than of not imposter syndrome, but being new at something. For me, then, yeah, imposter syndrome wouldn't be what I relate to. It would relate to being new at something and having to just decide for myself, I guess, what my skills are. And then, I don't know, we need feedback from other people too, I guess, to know ourselves also. Like, I can't just decide this is my skill. And
Yeah. I mean, when you're building a skill, you want feedback from people who already have it because they know what to look for, you know? And so that's totally reasonable. But again, it's like you need feedback from other people about your skill, but you don't need it about yourself. Like, you know, are you a worthwhile human being? Yes, full stop. Doesn't matter if you're a terrible roller skater or writer or whatever, right? It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. That's just true. Now, it's very hard for us to believe that that's true, but like, spoiler alert from a person who does this work, like, it's true. And so that's the distinction I'm trying to make.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I understand that. It's the difference between if something goes amiss, recognizing that it is the skill to work on. It's not like the person to attack as a human being.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, that's important. Let's see. I'm thinking I have one last question for you that I'd like to hear your thoughts about. I was wondering what do you think is the role of fun, pleasure, enjoyment in managing perfectionism and procrastination?
Mm, so important. Yeah. Um, a couple of things come to mind. One is I like to talk about productivity as operating in a cycle. So it's like people will think, oh, I need to get more, like I need to spend more time working. But really, the way I like to think of it is not like we need to have less rest and play and more work, but like we need to get the cycle moving smoothly. Um, so just as humans, like we can't work all the time, right? We have to work sometimes, and then we have to take breaks to sleep, but also to play and like talk to people and, do hobbies and whatever. Um, and both sides of that cycle need to be working in order for the cycle to keep moving smoothly. So if you just focus on working more and you're getting terrible sleep, and any moment that you're not working, you're feeling guilty, then it's not really going to work, you know? So being able to do things that are really restorative, both like for your body, like sleeping, but also like for your mind, or you might say like your spirit, like going out to the movies with your best friends, or like whatever it is that does that for you. That's actually like part of the puzzle. You can't just ignore that piece. Um, and then the other thing that comes to mind is intrinsic motivation. So there are, like, broadly speaking, two ways to be motivated to do something. You can be motivated intrinsically, which means you just enjoy doing the thing for its own sake, or you can be motivated extrinsically, which means like rewards or punishments are making you want to do this. Um, and intrinsic motivation is way more pleasant and more sustainable. So when you can foster intrinsic motivation, I'm all for that. And that means finding the fun in the work. That can be the fun of growing. So it turns out people really love to get better at things and learn more and just feel like they're growing as a person. And so that's why people actually don't like to do just the easiest task possible. They want it to be like a little bit of a challenge so that they feel like it's worthwhile. I'm getting something out of, not even before I even get to the end product, I'm getting something out of the process because I'm growing as a person. They also like to do something that has a purpose, it feels like it's going to be worthwhile, kind of aligns with their values and speaks to like what they think is important in life. And, we all kind of want to have an impact on the world in ways that like feel like they matter. And I'm blanking on the third thing right now. Autonomy is the third one. So just the feeling of like I have some control over this, rather than like somebody is dictating to me exactly how to do all of it. So, when you can customize the work that you're doing even a little bit, that can make it more fun. And easier to like maintain that intrinsic motivation. I also like to add into those are like the kind of the three pillars of intrinsic motivation in the literature, but I like to add in like, just get curious, like what's something in this task in front of you that you can get curious about and see as like a game or just as interesting. So yeah, so those are the ways that I think like pleasure and fun play into productivity.
Oh, thank you so much. That helps me realize that because sometimes I struggle with this idea of how to know if there's fear involved in something, if it means I should or shouldn't do it. And that helps me when you're describing that challenge, that is a part of intrinsic motivation, is a part of feeling that reward, that pleasure in the process. So that's really helpful to be like, okay, so something feels like a challenge, but it's still just intuitively has some fun and, like you said, curiosity to it, then that means it's probably a good the right way to go about things. And it's the right amount of challenge for, you know, where I'm authentically at in the moment. So yeah, thank you so much. This talk has been very enlightening for me to learn your perspectives about procrastination and perfectionism. And I know I'm going to be applying this to my own life. So I just really thank you for your time and your energy and for doing what you do to help people out there.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad that you found it helpful, and thanks so much for having me.